Do you like death? Then die. That might be the most quotable one-liner I've ever heard from a video game. And it's basically perfect. It's quick, it's to the point, and it works in every situation. You say that while playing EDF, it makes EDF better. If you say that playing a sports game, it actually makes sports better. If you said that while playing Crystal Princess Pony Palace 4, I guarantee that line will make that game better. Let's just be honest though, that last game was a real bloodbath. That line works perfectly for it. It's quick, it's to the point, and it comes out of nowhere and is awesome. Much like the game it came from, EDF 2017. I love it and its series so much, I would attribute it to being the best bargain game experience you could ever have. Even though the most recent titles don't come at bargain prices anymore, someday, EDF 5, I will be able to afford you, and that day will be glorious. But to get to the point of this is EDF Insect Armageddon. This is the second game we got in North America, and it was handled by a completely different development team that tried to make it as westernized as possible, and I hate that because anytime something tries to be as westernized as possible, you can really just replace westernized with completely misses the point, and that's kind of the case here, unfortunately. It feels like the developers were basically handed a napkin with a list of things that are basically EDF, but they never actually played it to understand exactly what was the core concept of what made EDF so awesome, and that really does end up hurting the core experience. The story is very EDF, in that there are giant bugs, go shoot, they ass. And that's basically your lot, except, because again this is trying to be as westernized as possible, it's no longer a cheesy B-movie with amazing one-liners and terrible overacting, and instead is about as generic a military shooter as possible, with copious amounts of Steve Blum sounding about as gruff and no-nonsense as he possibly could. Now again, the whole thing about EDF is it was a budget title, and they flew that flag proud. They said, okay, we can't have this huge AAA experience, we're gonna put this game out on a budget, let's roll with that. They owned the fact that they were a budget game. They rolled with it and they made it part of their whole aesthetic, saying, okay, this is not gonna be high budget, so we're gonna make it look low budget. We're gonna make it goofy. We're gonna play the story with eyes rolling so hard that if they rolled any harder, they would pop out of its skull and roll down the street. Here it's played entirely seriously, and that just sets a weird tone for this game, because it just kind of feels like, from a story perspective, it completely misses the point. Now don't get me wrong, these games, the story's kind of throwaway, it's more about the gameplay itself, but it completely gets the tone wrong, compared to pretty much every other iteration of this series. And while I'm talking about story, let's talk about the ending, because there isn't one, really so much as the game just stops. Mid-turret section, because, again, we had to make this Western, so we're gonna just throw turret sections left, right, and center at you because reasons, but literally the game just stops mid-level. Now apparently that is to extend the level on harder difficulties, which, I mean, game, if you're gonna try and Mischief Makers the ending here, you have to earn it by being a really fun, legitimately great experience, like Mischief Makers. You are not. This is coming from someone who loves this series, and you are kind of a slog, but let's get to gameplay. Now the gameplay to EDF Insect Armageddon is largely similar to every other EDF game. There are lots of bugs, you need to shoot them. What's great about this game though is compared to its previous iteration, there are multiple different classes that all play sorta differently. You've got like the standard trooper, which plays like the character from EDF 2017, and in one mode you are locked as this character, which is a weird choice. You have a sort of heavy weapons guy, you've got a sort of support guy. I pretty much entirely played as the guy with the jetpack because I really like the wing divers in the next entry of the series, as well as 2 entries prior to this one. Seriously, just being able to fly around on a jetpack is awesome, although it's not that great in this game. Again, kinda missing the point, but alright. Now what's really weird about the gameplay, specifically the level structure, is that it tries to have it both ways. It tries to keep the original core concepts of the original EDF games in that it's basically just a matter of blow everything up and have a stupid fun time of it, and that's still there. But now it's a very handheld experience, more or less, Whereas previous iterations of this game involved huge open maps where you could just basically run wherever you wanted to, so long as you just killed everything and win, here you have to go through various guided corridors, or you have to follow various specific points on your compass to get to specific checkpoints. And you'll be instructed to hold down a button for X period of time as your character sits and basically waits around, not shooting bugs, by the way, thus kind of completely taking away actual gameplay this game could have. And instead, you know, you're just sort of waiting around until your character finishes picking his nose or whatever. And the great thing about this, it's interruptible, and if it's interrupted, you get to start over. But it's not even just that in terms of level structure, because there's a lot of just blatant walls that take away from what was at one point a great just open sandbox world where you could go anywhere, destroy anything. And if there's not physical barriers, there's like giant laser barriers. And the weird thing is, half of these barriers are just like little tiny things that pretty much any character could jump over, which is even more awkward considering that, you know, as I said a few sentences ago, you know, one of your characters has a jetpack. Again, kind of defeating the purpose a little bit. But at its core, that's kind of every level. You've got the kill all the insects bits, which is what you need to do to finish the level, which is great. That's the fun part. That's the part that's, you know, EDF. But in between that, you have to go from point A to point B and basically just hold a button down and not shoot insects until your character has done something arbitrarily because the plot demanded it. That's not EDF. That's not fun. That feels like any other generic military shooter of recent years that's just, well, we need to pad out gameplay, so let's just add a quick time event because reasons. You know, EDF didn't need that. EDF was a very pure experience. It was very samey, but it knew what it was trying to be. It was trying to be just shoot all these giant monsters and have a dumb, fun time doing it. And in between that, the corridors and the turret sections that, again, they decided they had to add for some bizarre reason, you know, it feels like it's trying every step of its way to not be EDF, but just be any other generic military shooter from the time. And that really sucks, because gameplay-wise, you know, there's still EDF here, and that's the fun part. But it's trying to get so far away from that too, which is killing it, and making it lose any sense of identity it possibly had. Oh, but that's not the end of all the changes. Just you wait, just you wait. EDF was a very, very simple game. You shot things, you picked up loot, and then you use that loot to go shoot up other things, and it was awesome. In this game, it doesn't even do that right. It completely changes the drop system. First and foremost, instead of 3 different types of drops, one being health, one being permanent health increases, and one being weapons, well, now you just have health restoring and weapon drops. And they really toned down the drops in this game. I remember I was lucky to see like 5 different weapon drops at the end of one mission in this game, whereas comparatively to EDF 2017, I sometimes had levels that would literally take a minute to scroll through every single thing I picked up. You know, this game is taking away from how much loot it has, and it's not really replacing it with much. Instead of permanent health increases, now it has a leveling system, which, again, I don't know why. It feels like it's taking away from how pure an experience EDF was, so now you have to focus on leveling your characters, because while each level does give you a more tangible health increase than picking up individual single health units that permanently increase your overall health, well, now you have to wait large periods of time without any real sense of progression just to build up your health a little bit. And what's even more amazing about the drops and the leveling system is, unlike any other game in the series, if you get a weapon or something, even if you have it, you can't use it, because every weapon is locked to a level rank. So until you hit the specific level, you can't use that awesome shiny new toy you got. And I think one of the best things about EDF, one of the most fun experiences I've personally found, is like going back a few levels from like my furthest point in progression, turning up the difficulty to max, and just trying to survive by the skin of my teeth to get like one giant endgame weapon to just blow through other levels until I need something else. That is a really fun experience, and you can't even do that here. That is just bizarre why that would happen. And let's just keep talking about the weapons for just a second, because that's one of the best things about EDF, is getting new weapons and just experimenting and seeing all the crazy stuff you can do in these games. Because of course this is a series that featured laser chainsaws at one point. Yeah, for some reason, every weapon, as far as I could tell, has like 2 variants. And yeah, there are multiple upgrades, but it's still the same like 2 variants of the same weapon types. So once you've tried each variant, everything else is just a straight upgrade of those 2 variants, and it's really boring. in EDF. What? Seriously, every ounce of soul that the previous game had is just missing here. And it sucks because there is like an actual good fun experience here. It's just buried under so much crap because it's trying not to be EDF. It's completely baffling that anyone would do this. If there's one thing about this game that I think is an improvement over the previous iteration of EDF, it's that vehicles, well, they're air quotes mandatory. You can go without them, but there are levels that seem to be designed specifically for using them. They seem to at least work better than the previous games. They're a bit more responsive, they're a bit easier to handle based on what I remember. But I mean, I've never really felt the need to use a vehicle in an EDF game other than this one. It's just not something you ever need to do. You just run around shooting bugs. You don't need a tank to do that, although it does sound awesome until you have to try and play with it. And I mean, EDF 2017, the previous iteration in this series, say what you will about it for being kind of very, very samey and bland over time, because there was like 15 different enemies, and while you only fought at least one or two, like maybe once or twice, I only genuinely recall fighting the giant Godzilla thing once, that was 15 enemies over the course of 50 levels. Yes, it felt drawn out, but at least it gave you a lot of content. This game doesn't even have half the enemies, and it doesn't even have a third the number of levels. I think there's like 14 levels in this game, and it doesn't even have like a new enemy per level. And what's awesome about that is half the enemies are just palette swaps of other iterations of themselves. And while that's nothing new, it just feels wholly lazy because, you know, it's got so little time to film. I mean, the least they could do is add more individual monsters to shoot up, because, I mean, you've already taken away most of the charm of it, but, you know, at least keep the gameplay a little bit. So, yeah, it's messed with the overall series progression. It's taken away the sense of satisfaction you get as you progress and you find new weapons and you get to try them out. It's taken away from fighting different enemies, even though, you know, you fight all the enemies about the same. There's not a lot this game really adds to the series, so much as it just takes every single thing away. And that's sad, because this is EDF. It has the core EDF gameplay that makes it awesome, but it feels like every step of the way it's been eroded to almost the point where it's just not enjoyable. This game also features a survival gauntlet style horde mode, because that's what they did at the time. Nowadays it would be a battle royale because reasons, and I didn't really even play any of this because I never really enjoyed those modes to begin with, but you know, the core of the campaign is enjoyable, but it feels really bloody generic. And while pretty much every other game in the series flies the flag of, you know, we understand it's a budget, so we're gonna make it appear like a budget, but we're at least gonna put in effort to make it enjoyable, this one feels like it takes almost a complete antithetical approach to it. They tried to make it look good, they tried to make it look as, you know, high profile as they could for the budget, but they kind of stripped out the fun and the fact that, you know, it was proud of being a budget game and it was doing its best at being a budget game. Instead, we've got this game that's sort of embarrassed about being a budget game, so it's trying so hard not to be. And instead, it loses pretty much any sense of personality. But that said, blowing up bugs is still fun. Oh yeah, and anthills? Yeah, these are fun. So enemies will spawn indefinitely until you shut these down, and you have to pretty much shut down every anthill you come across in order to advance through the plot. So what you have to do is start arming a bomb, which again is holding down a button, watching your character pick his nose until it's sufficiently picked enough, and then you can leave. That is until enemies attack you and make you have to start all over. And fun fact about anthills, ants like to spawn from them. So yeah, you're pretty much constantly dealing with a flood of enemies attacking you, and while you can temporarily shut them down, rarely are they ever individual anthills. There's always usually 2 or 3 next to each other, so there's pretty much always something interrupting you. That's not fun, it's frustrating, and it's boring, and not to compare this to a significantly better iteration of the series, but you know, every other iteration of this series has had a much more sensible approach to destroying anthills, and this is going to blow minds, but you shoot at them, and then they blow up. You know, like everything else in every other EDF game ever, and that's part of why it made it such a goofy, awesome time. This game just feels like it doesn't understand what EDF is. You know, if EDF was a parody of B-movies and like bad militaristic shooters. This is literally the thing EDF is trying to parody, but it doesn't even understand that it's supposed to be a parody. It's playing it entirely straight, and that misses the point by a country mile. The overall presentation to this game is really kind of just generic. Like everything else in this game, it feels almost like a diet off-brand EDF. It feels very, very budget, but it looks like most of the budget sort of went into the presentation. The textures on everything feel a little bit higher quality than the previous iterations, and everything is desaturated and like brown, because why have color in EDF ever? Oh wait, literally every other iteration was actually pretty colorful and actually a lot more visually interesting because of it. Huh. And audio-wise, in terms of soundtrack, I genuinely don't think I can actually rate this because I don't remember any of the music, but in my defense, having actually gone back to record some of the audio for this game, I can tell you, part of the reason for that is the sound effects are just cranked way too high up. You have to actually like actively turn sound effects down pretty far before you can actually hear anything else. But there is copious amounts of Steve Bloom sounding like a generic Soldier Man guy, so, you know, at least the voice acting is quality, if very, very generic, leading to, let's just be honest, it's not great, but it is supposed to be a budget title as much as this game is terrified to admit that. Now, if you want a copy of EDF Insect Armageddon on the Xbox 360, also available on PS3 and through Steam, cheapest one I'm seeing right now on eBay is about $9, and that seems okay. Bear in mind, I got the previous iteration, which, again, I hold in much higher regard, for less than $5 from what I recall. It's been a long time since I bought that game, but, you know, I'm also more prone to immediately jumping in and playing that game again. On the bright side, if you happen to have Xbox Live Gold, this is one of the quote-unquote free games you get with it for the next week or so, as of this recording. And for free, it's okay. I didn't pay too much for it, but that's the thing about this game. It feels like diet off-brand knockoff EDF. It plays very similar, it has some neat features in its multiple classes, but it feels like instead of trying to be EDF and being proud of being EDF, it's trying to like shy away from that and be just a generic third-person army shooter that just happens to have giant bugs as its targets, and that completely misses the point. You know, if EDF was a parody of the generic military shooter, then this is literally the thing it's trying to parody. And it's in that lack of self-awareness and parody that it loses almost any sense of identity. Sure, the shooting is fun, and sure, trying out the weapons is okay, but it's just nowhere near as good. Would I recommend you get this game? Well, only under two conditions would I necessarily recommend this. I would recommend this if you were an EDF superfan like I am. Seriously, these games are awesome. But that said, if you are an EDF superfan, you're probably going to be playing this just for the sake of saying you've played them all. Not necessarily because this is one you want to hunt out. In fact, you'll probably find this one to be largely disappointing, kind of like I do. The other instance in which I would recommend this game is if you're just interested in getting into the series. And that is because of the sole reason that it's only going to get better from here. The problem is this might turn you off the series entirely because, again, it just doesn't have the same spirit as the rest. But if you'll excuse me, I think I see EDF 5 on sale on the PlayStation Store. And having had to sit through this, I think I've earned it. Woo! EDF! EDF! EDF!